Welcome to the Lara Jane Layton Show. This podcast is for you, the person who keeps putting others first. Your self-talk has held you back. You no longer need to take a second seat. Let's explore ways to overcome self-doubt. You can silence that inner bully voice and achieve your full potential. Here's your host, Lara Jane.
Hello, listener. It's Lara Jane again, and I am here with a new guest. Her name is Catherine, and she is a yoga instructor and coach. And all the information about her is in the show notes already. But Catherine's going to tell us a little bit about shadow work, which in my mind is a lot like silencing our inner bully. So, Catherine, how about telling us about shadow work?
Yeah, thank you, Lara Jane. And I just want to say that I was listening to your podcast earlier today, and I just love the topic that you're talking about here, specifically identifying this inner bully and the conversations that you're having around it, and all these different perspectives of bringing in people's relationship to the inner bully. I love that it's such a beautiful way to normalize this experience that we're all having, which is a pretty strong relationship with our inner critic.
Yes.
So I just want to thank you for doing that. And I love being a part of this. And I've had a long relationship with my inner critic. The first half of my life was a very struggled relationship with my inner critic. And now I have a more friendly relationship with it, which is really nice. She's still there. She's still talking to me all the time.
You know that they're there. We need them. They keep us safe. But it's when we use them to an extent where they start holding us back, where we need to, let's be friendly now.
Yeah, there were two tools specifically that I'd love to talk about today. And you kind of mentioned that I do them already in terms of, shadow work coaching and yoga. And these two tools are really what helped me build a better relationship with my inner critic. And I think it's important to kind of go back into my history, if you don't mind, to share a little bit about my past. And so how these tools played into building this new relationship with my inner critic, who I've personified, and I can share that with you in a few moments. But when I was a child, when I was about 8, my mom had ALS. She passed away from ALS, and my father left us after that. And my brother and I were sent to live with extended family members who were quite wonderful. They gave us a beautiful house, a beautiful home, lots of love. But there's something about this shock that happened, losing my family. I wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. There was no warning sign. Nobody was talking to me about this dismantling of my family that took place. And so when we moved to San Francisco with this new family, I became basically a social chameleon, because there was this idea that I had to make sure that I was safe in this house, that if I did anything wrong, if I misbehaved, if I acted in a wrong way, that I would be sent to an orphanage. Now, I don't know that that's something that they actually put on me, but it's definitely something that was in my mind.
Yes.
Are you relating to this? You look like you're nodding here.
I so much. And there was a recent quote, and I looked it up, and I don't have it in front of me, but it says, if you are fitting in, you're not being your authentic self. But if you belong, you can be your authentic self. And that kind of reminded me of that chameleon, where I'm trying to fit in. I'm trying to do what you want me to, so you like me, instead of, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And if I don't like you, I'll find another. If you don't like me, I'll find another crowd. So I definitely have been there multiple times.
Yeah. And which sounds great, because you think about it now and it's just like, just be yourself. It seems like that almost seems like the easier way. But I can say that as a 49-year-old woman, I wasn't able to say that as easily as a 9-year-old child who was very nervous about having no control about where I was going to get food, who was going to take care of me, how was I going to live?
That was your survival. If they
survival.
Didn't like you, if an animal doesn't act right with the pack, it gets kicked out and it dies. That's inbred in us. It's meant to be there for a reason. But our human brains are so analytic that it takes it to the extent of when it's not healthy.
And I took it to that extent. And the family that I grew up with, they were not very comfortable with the emotional range that my brother and I were experiencing at that point. We didn't understand how to process the grief that we were feeling. I was in a state of shock. I pretty much lost my voice. I wasn't able to speak. It was like I had this big lump in my throat. And that's really when I can remember my inner critic becoming a part of my life. Mm-hmm. She was very strong. She had a very strong voice about what I was supposed to be, how I was supposed to be acting. Don't be sad. Don't act out. Don't act angry. Like there was a lot of control that was happening with my inner critic. She was micromanaging my every move at that time. And now I can see that she was trying to keep me safe, right? Her goal was to try to keep me part of the group so that I could stay in this house. And the way that she was informing me or instructing me was controlling my behavior and how I felt about myself. So essentially what was happening is I was allowing myself to be some things and making sure that I wasn't behaving in other ways. So there was this really strict line of like the wrong way to be and the right way to be. And so this is where later on in life, I became very interested in shadow work, because it's essentially looking at these ideas that we have about what we're supposed to be, our persona, and what we're not allowed to be, our shadow. And I think about the poet Robert Bly. He wrote this book called A Little Book About the Inner Shadow. And one of the things he talks about is that we all have this invisible bag that we carry behind us. And throughout, our lives, especially our younger lives, we take these parts that we find unacceptable and we throw them in this invisible bag. And then we keep these parts that are acceptable. So the way that I looked at it is like, okay, what was acceptable is I needed to be really self-reliant, and I had to be really independent, and I had to be calm and cool and low maintenance as as possible. So anything that seemed to be needy, high maintenance, angry, or upset, those became shadows of mine. Those are parts of me that weren't allowed to exist. So I put those in the invisible bag. And the way Robert Bly says it is, by the time we get into high school, we each have invisible bags that are miles long behind us. And these are all of our shadow parts. So we enter our young adult life with a very fragmented image of who we are. And the problem is that those shadow parts are still part of us. I'm still somebody that has needs, and that's going to come out. And
even though we hide them for a while, you got to take care of them
as long as we can, right? We don't want them to be there. Like I thought that the worst possible thing I could be was needy. Mm-hmm. The worst possible thing I could be is somebody that required something from somebody else, because what I needed to be is giving to other people and make myself available. So I became the confidant to people in my family. I became in service to people in my family. I became this really strong people pleaser. And by the time I got into my 20s, I just had a lot of rage, just so much rage. And the way that I look at that rage was this from ignoring all these different parts of me for so long, and ignoring my needs for so long, and feeling like I didn't matter. And my story by the time I got into my 20s was there was just a lot of self-hate in that.
It's funny how we can start hating ourselves over just not being ourselves.
Isn't it? It's so interesting. Yeah. And that's what I love about shadow work, because shadow, to me, doing shadow discovery is about the outcome of it is self-love.
Yes.
The process of shadow discovery is looking at the parts of you that you don't love, that are unlovable, and really looking at them and seeing, is it as bad as I thought it was? And so I can see you identifying with that.
We label them as unlovable, but they're lovable. And we just don't know that yet.
Yes. Thank you for that clarification, because that's what it is. It's like this, I'm using this needy as an example. This needy part of me, it was something that was really hard for me. If I was in a relationship, and it's like I was always in relationships where I was taking care of people very strongly. I was always giving to them. I was always nurturing to them. And if they asked me something that I needed, or if they wanted to know what I wanted, I'm fine. Everything's great. That was always my story. And then I would get really resentful with them later on because I felt like they didn't care about me.
But we told them we were fine. Yes,
but we told them we were
too.
Fine. And then here I am acting out in some way, like mad or being really passive aggressive. And then I'm feeling shame about it afterwards. My inner critic is super strong, saying, how could you do that? You are so needy. That's so pathetic. You're being really clingy, this whole storyline. And that inner critic is just trying to protect me by keeping my shadow pieces in the shadow bag behind me and not letting them be seen, because we think, me and my inner critic think that those parts are unlovable. And if this person sees those parts, they're not going to want to be around me anymore.
I'm with you. I had a really big bag. It's not quite so bad now, but you know what? It's not gone. I still deal with integrating my shadow into my life and hiding things. I kind of, this is my excuse. If I was perfect, I wouldn't be on the earth because I would have learned all my lessons and I'd be done. So I take it as it's okay. I have to say, it's okay. I'm learning. I'm growing.
I think when I first started doing self-development, I approached it from this perspective of trying to fix myself. And I think maybe a lot of people do that, trying to make myself perfect. Okay, I'm just going to fix these broken pieces. And then once I fix them, I'm going to be perfect. And then I'm going to be okay because I'll be great in a relationship and I'm going to have the dream job and I'm going to do all the great things. And so I would do all this.
It must have worked.
Well, I would do all this work. And then some shadow would come out and smack me in the face because I would behave in some certain way that was unfavorable and did not meet the standard of my identity, of how I saw my identity. And so I would feel all this shame about it. And then the inner critic would get really strong again. And so that would be this perpetual cycle that I would go through. And so what I came to realize, and this is my response to what you were just saying, is that this is a lifelong process. I've been discovering, actively working on shadows of mine since 2010. And I'm still actively working on shadows of mine. I'm still finding them. And, where they show up most, obviously, is very much in relationship and how we reflect those parts of ourselves. I think of the parts of us that are in that invisible bag reflecting on the people in front of us. And so when we get triggered by the people in front of us, we're just seeing aspects of ourselves that we haven't processed yet. And those are invitations to process those parts.
I know every time I get annoyed at somebody, and I don't even know why, I have to self-reflect. What is it in me that it's triggering? Because those people are just fine. There's nothing wrong with them, but there's something going on inside of me that's getting uncomfortable. And one of the ones just triggers me so fast are those cashiers or hostesses that, oh, it's such a beautiful day. And I will quit being fake. Why does that bother me so bad? I don't know. And I don't care. I just have to say, I am so glad that they are able to put on a happy face today. It's okay. Because I used to just think, oh, they're hiding something, because that's what I did.
Yeah. I
hid behind a smile for years. And so I just assume they're not happy when they're that overly bubbles.
It's interesting to say that. It makes me think of this. When I first moved to Sacramento, I would walk my dog, and I have this 70-pound pit bull, and I would walk him around, and I would see, this happened a lot, where I would see a little old lady walking towards me, and then she would be so scared and run the opposite direction. And I would find all this judgment, anger judgment. Why am I reacting? This poor little old lady just got scared and I'm mad at her because she got scared of this thing. Why am I having an emotional reaction to this thing? And I started to look at the conversation, the judgment that was happening in my head, which was, God, she's just so scared of the world. And it's grow up and be strong and be independent. There was this condemning her for being terrified of things. And so I took that as an opportunity to look at okay, so what am I afraid of? And when I asked myself that, I thought my first response was, I'm streetwise. I grew up in San Francisco. I know what I'm talking about. I grew up, in the Tenderloin. I went to school in the Tenderloin, and I had this whole story where I was really fighting for this identity that I had of being this tough girl. But yet I was triggered by this kind of feeble, scared, archetype.
Yes.
And so I had to look at, when I started to argue for my identity of being tough, that to me is something I call a shadow clue, which is like, okay, I'm really fighting for this identity. So what part of me is this scared, feeble little person that's afraid of the world? And I started to uncover how much this tough girl was protecting this scared child in me that was out in the world that didn't feel safe. I was in a new town. It's a very different town culturally. And I think that I was bumping up against a lot of fear and discomfort around that. So it was this opportunity to now let this part of me come into the picture so that I wasn't over relying on tough girl, which I had been for most of my life. She could relax a little bit because now she didn't have to take the role of everything.
Yes.
And then I was allowing this part of me that was not feeling safe and scared in the world. And how could I nurture her and allow her to be a part of it? And with that process of integrating those two parts of yourself, the inner critic starts to fade away a little bit, because the inner critic is what is keeping one in the forefront and one in the background. Don't be this, always be that, right? And so when you start to allow these different parts of you to exist, the inner critic isn't as strong, because it's not trying to keep you safe from anything, because all these parts are here and available and you have access to them.
Right. So we're going to take a quick break. There was a nice pause. We're going to take a quick break and get a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back.
This podcast is sponsored by Lara Jane Coaching. You know you're ready to silence your inner bully voice. Let Lara Jane support you with coaching. To schedule an introduction call, go to larajanelayton.com.
Welcome back, listener. I am so excited with all of the wonderful things Catherine has talked about. And our next thing she's going to tell us about is she has a free online yoga that we can sign up for. And so we're going to talk to her about her yoga instruction and what she does and how it also helps us silence our inner bully. Catherine.
Yeah, thank you. So this is the second tool that I was talking about. The first one we talked in the first section was looking at these hidden mindsets and these ways that we think about ourselves, so that we can start to develop a stronger sense of self-love by looking at the parts of us that we maybe don't think are very lovable. And so yoga is really the second part of that. When I got into my 20s, I was so riddled with anxiety from just being a portion of myself, really, not allowing so much of myself to exist in the world and feeling a lot of shame about parts of who I was. And so I had all of this anxiety, social anxiety, and just, nervous system anxiety that was never dealt with from when I was a child. And so I was introduced to yoga through a therapist. I did talk therapy, which was great, but I didn't find it as effective. My therapist kept asking me how I felt, but I was so cut off from my emotional center because I wasn't allowed to feel those things as a child, that I would look at him and say, I don't know, I feel fine, because that was my line. I feel fine. Everything's fine. I didn't know what he was asking of me because I had no connection to my body. And so when he finally suggested I try yoga, I started going to yoga classes. And at the time, I had no real physical practice. I was not embodied at all. And I started to go to yoga, and there was something about it that just kept me coming back. And I think the thing that really was different about yoga than any other kind of physical activity was the teacher's invitation to keep paying attention to what was happening in my body. And then, so at first I came to yoga, taking vinyasa yoga, which is a more active style. So I started to really feel into my physical being. And then I was injured at one point. I hurt my knee. I had knee surgery. And that's where I was introduced to gentle yoga and restorative. And that is where things really started to change for me, because it was a slower process of looking at myself and feeling into every single sensation that I had in a slower way, instead of moving quickly through it, and looking at my breath. And then in restorative yoga, which was very difficult at first and gave a lot of space for my inner critic. Restorative yoga, for those that are listening that don't know, is basically in one class, you'll lay in maybe 3 to 4 poses, anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes long. So there's no movement in the class. You're propped up by yoga props, and you're just guided into this relaxing, resting state, which was very difficult for me at first and is for most people, because the inner critic starts to go crazy. Your mind starts to go crazy and the inner critic's yelling at you. You can't do this. What are we doing here? You can't quiet down. You're not able to do this. And at some point that starts to switch off and you can just float into this state of rest, which is a wonderful way to recover a nervous system that's been traumatized and lives in a state of anxiety for a long time.
It is for sure my favorite style.
I love it.
And for quite a while, I was unable to move. So it made it so I could do yoga. But now that I can move, it's still my favorite. It's still so peaceful. And you come out, you can go in totally stressed, ready to have your pressure blow steam off. And it calmly lets the steam out, not this violent, it's just very calm. And I love that about restorative yoga. So that class that you have online, is it a restore class?
Well, I teach a bunch of online classes. So I have an online yoga studio. It's a membership-based studio, but there is a restorative class on Wednesday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That is a free class to the community. So anybody can just go onto my website, which is liminalspace.net, and go into the class on Wednesday night. And it's a restorative yoga class. And the one thing I want to say about restorative yoga, it is talked a lot about as like you go in and you're just calm. And I just want to say that is not everybody's experience. A lot of times, and I would say maybe the first 10 times, and then maybe even 10 years into your practice, it's still going to happen. You go into restorative yoga and you lay down, and I call it a mental apocalypse, because your mind just starts going crazy. And it doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong if that's your experience, even if that's your experience the first 10 times. I practice restorative yoga all the time. I've been practicing restorative yoga for 23 years, and I still have that experience quite a bit, but I just keep going. And that's what all of this stuff that we're talking about is. It's not like a one quick fix. It's not a pill that we're going to pop to that's going to resolve, these problems or these issues that we're having with our inner critic. This is a lifelong practice. And for me, it's a mental health practice. Mm-hmm. It's calming my nervous system. Even to this day, if I lose my practice, my anxiety goes up and my inner critic voices get stronger. And so if I come back to my practice, they start to calm them a little bit more.
Yeah, it's like peeling the onion, you all those layers of the onion, and you just have to deal with each of those shadows and one at a time. And sometimes when you get into all 30,000 of them want to talk to you right now. And it's like, wait, one at a time.
It's a lot. There's a lot of people going on in my brain.
Oh, Catherine, this has been awesome. And we are out of time, but you are so full of wisdom and experience do you have some last special words for our listener today?
Oh my goodness. There's this Anne Lamott quote that I heard about a year ago, and I just think of it all the time, where she says, rest and laughter are the most subversive acts. And I try to keep that in mind. And when I'm doing specifically shadow work and yoga, because some of this stuff is very big and heavy stuff, but to remind myself that that's pretty much the goal, is I want to get to the point where I can feel calm and ease in my body. I want to get to the point where I can freely laugh about things, including myself. And so doing this is not about staying in the muck of it all the time, but making yourself more available to those things.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. And listener, I want to just remind everybody that Catherine and I are not medical professionals. We are here as people that have gone through shit in our lives, and we have survived and have some special tools to keep you going. So know that we're just like you, and we're here to help any way we can. So thank you for joining us, Catherine. And listener, our next episode is our challenge episode. So I look forward to talking to you again then.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Are you tired of waking up exhausted? You are not alone. If you're looking to take your life back, let's start with the simple step of adjusting your self-talk. Stay tuned for the next episode with your host, Lara Jane. Remember to follow the show so you don't miss a next simple step that you can use to feel more confident. And please leave an honest review.